Users of Reddit. What person ruined their entire life by making one mistake? Story 1. Guy I went to high school with was kicked out of his college ROTC and moved back home. After some time of living at home, his dad walked into his bedroom and went off about him being a lazy ass and needing to do something with his life. He decided he was going to take his gun and rob a bank. Supposedly the gun wasn't loaded, but he did successfully rob the bank and get away. Some time went by. He moved out of his parents' house and started living it up. He eventually told someone he trusted. That person turned him in. He was arrested and charged. He got a count for every person who was in the bank because he had a gun. You can decide if he ruined his life when he decided to rob the bank or when he decided to tell someone that he did it. Story 2. Some guy tried to come into my nightclub when he was clearly too drunk. I made the call to not let him in, so he starts shouting at me and tries to aggressively walk up to me. I put my hands up in defense, and he's pushing back against me. Then the dude lunged at my boss next to me, so my boss shoves him. The guy tumbles backwards and slams the back of his head on a curb. Paralyzed from the neck down forever. Tried to take my boss to court for $15 million, but the camera showed this guy instigating everything. Story 3. Local police chief did a hit and run over the weekend on a parked, unattended vehicle in his department vehicle. By the end of the day, Tuesday, he was resigning. State police investigated and issued a bunch of summary offense citations. DUI was not among the charges. No one was hurt and the guy resigned, but, there's only one reason you drive away from hitting something after midnight. Story 4. When I was in my early 20s, I worked as an energy worker in field service. One of my really close friends was someone who I was on calls with regularly. A project lead pressured both of us to work on equipment we weren't qualified or trained to work on, and we unfortunately relented. We were halfway done with the task, and I walked out to the truck to grab water bottles. Halfway to the truck, I hear a giant buzz, then a huge bang, then screaming. By the time I get back to the generator room, he's fully on fire. The cabinet had arc blasted, and he had been right in the way. By the time I got our fire blanket from the truck, he was basically fully engulfed. I was able to put him out and get him into as much of a recovery position as I could, and then I called our shop to get them to organize rescue to our location. He somehow survived 80 to 90% second and third degree burns, but coded so many times he ended up with severe brain damage from oxygen deprivation. He lost his eyes, his sense of smell and taste, and much of his sense of touch. I think he lost his hearing too from the noise of it too. He's in a vegetative state in a full-time care facility now. I had frequent nightmares for years about it. The thing that stuck with me the most was since the arc blast had hit him basically right in the face, it basically boiled his skin off. I ran in and saw him ripping large pieces of his face off while he tried to bat the flames off. The smell and sight of that never goes away. Story 5. My brother. He had 5 kids and a wife and some rage issues. About 25 years ago, he was at his son's soccer game, and one of the other dads struck up a conversation about soccer with my brother's wife. My brother fucking lost his mind. He punched that guy, grabbed his wife by the hair and dragged her to his truck. Several witnesses testified about this later. Once they were home, he entered the kitchen, shoved his wife up against the fridge, and strangled her to death. The kids testified to this. He then loaded the kids into his truck, grabbed his rifle, and headed toward the city where his plan was to kill me, our father, his kids, and then himself, to spare them all from the shame. Thankfully, he had threatened this many times to many people. Traffic was shit that day, and he was intercepted by police. He served 20-plus years of his sentence. I testified twice as his parole hearings trying to prevent him from getting out, because I knew what he was and always would be. He was eventually released, but died 2 days later in a car accident. Story 6. A neighbor, his wife and his friend's wife, were at the neighbor's house. The 2 men both got into arguments with their wives and decided to go out drinking down the street. A few hours later, I'm woken up by my sister banging on my bedroom door. I was staying with them at the time, because a car crashed doing probably 80 in a 25 miles per hour right next to our home. I jumped out of bed and got outside to see the neighbor's car crashed into a tree and 2 men trapped inside. The tree the car hit stopped them from ramming into another neighbor's house, and they hit it so hard, the battery was in the street after hours. Their car caught fire, and we had to watch them burn to death, still see it and smell it every now and then when trying to sleep. I had never met the wife, so I had no idea who she was when she came up and asked me what happened, so I said some guy crashed his car. She took off running after she recognized the car. Can't believe I told her that her husband died so bluntly. Story 7. A guy my mom had gone on a couple of dates with was distraught when she broke it off with him. The reason being his alcoholism. She was raised by a drunk and didn't want her kids exposed to it. He was so upset that he decided to go to his sister's house a few miles away to drown his sorrows. In his drunken state, he decided to drive back to our apartment and beg my mom to take him back. On his way there, he hit a family of 3 with his pickup truck. The parents survived, but the 5-year-old little boy was killed. I don't remember the guy really. Steve something I'm pretty sure, but I'll never forget that little boy I never met. His name was Alex Bishop, and he died in Kent, Washington. This happened in 1992, and I still think of him and his parents suffering fairly often. I was 13, and it traumatized me, knowing that I had met someone who killed a baby. The POS did 10 years in prison for vehicular homicide. Apparently, he also had a 5-year-old son. I openly talk crap to and about anyone who is willing to risk others around them by driving under the influence. Story 8. Security company. This happened before I worked there, but some co-workers told me the story. Guy was doing well at his job. Got lots of promotions, on his way to lieutenant, but was too into his job and got a police scanner that he would listen to. One day, just as he was getting off work, a high-speed chase went by. He hoped in his personal vehicle with his firearm, got to the front of the chase, blocked the suspect in, and pulled his gun. Suddenly the cops were much more interested in the crazy guy with a gun. Got hit with several felony charges. Story 9. Kid I went to high school with wasn't going to graduate and decided to protest by speeding and doing wheelies on the road in front of the school. On his 3rd round, he passes a pickup truck, hooks his leg on the bumper, and is thrown from the bike right on his head, snapping his neck. School posthumously graduated him. Edited to help clear up questions. Happened in 1995 on the northern Illinois/southern Wisconsin border. I noticed his intelligence has been questioned. Let me share an additional anecdote. His nickname was Bob. When asked what it was backwards, he replied without guile or irony that it was OOB. Whether you agree with the school's action in graduating him or not, locally it was considered window dressing, as the whole town knew of what happened within hours of his accident. Story 10. College frat party. Very chill vibe, not a rager. Mildly drunk kid, mid-conversation, decides to hop up and have a seat on the railing of a deck we were out on. He hopped up and did one of those panicked flails that you do when your chair is about to tip backwards on you, falls backwards off the deck, lands on his head. Medevac to the nearest trauma center. Did not make it through the night. I didn't know him, just seen him around campus. What was really sad to see was most people assumed he was being a drunk idiot at a raging frat party and wound up doing some dumb stunt. He really just made a minor drunken mistake/miscalculation and paid for it with his life. Story 11. My former roommate. Had a great job, made great money, had his own house in which I rented a room. The only problem was he was a serious alcoholic and a crappy person. He'd get up at 4:30 to go to work, get off at 2, and then hit the bar until 11. Every single night. Unless he had a girl coming over, then he'd come home at 10, do a quick cleanup of his filthy room, and have obnoxious and very inconsiderate loud sex. He hit a guy who was riding his bike drunk driving his way home one night. Fled the scene, came home, and went to the neighbor's house and said he hit a pole. The neighbor called the police, and on the way to the house, they found the guy he hit with his front bumper next to the body. He went to jail for vehicular homicide. Did 6 months and got out. Now he lives with his parents and can't get a job because his story is a little infamous in our town. His sister took over his mortgage and lives in his house now. All he does all day is cry on Facebook about how life isn't fair and badmouths the guy he killed. Story 12. An ex-girlfriend of mine, lovely person, was out at a restaurant/bar with a friend one night. They had a meal and played pool. When they left, for some reason she drove his car. I don't know why, but I know that when she and I were together she asked to drive my car just for the experience of driving a different car. Maybe that was it. And I imagine, driving in someone else's car, you take a few extra seconds to adjust the seat and the mirrors and get your bearings. Unbeknownst to her, a teenager was driving a Mustang nearby. He was pissed because someone passed him a mile earlier, and his ego was hurt. He decided to catch up to the guy and floored the Mustang, getting up to speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour. As my ex pulled out of the parking lot to cross the median, she had no way of seeing the Mustang barreling toward her over a hill. He crashed into her, killing her and her passenger. 2 seconds earlier or later, and they would not have made contact. I went to his trial. I remember her poor mother sitting there stone-faced while testimony was given. Several lives were ruined in that moment. My ex was only 26. She never got married, never had kids, never found her way in life. Story 13. My father punched a window out of anger, severed the artery and ligament in his bicep, almost bled out, effectively removed his ability to work with his hands, which was the one thing he had going for him. He then became a moody POS alcoholic. Actually, he always was one, but way worse after this. He then beat the neighbor across the road with a pipe after they got drunk and got into an argument. He was arrested and went to jail. My parents lost the family home. They ended up splitting. I went no contact with him. 2 years later, he took his life. Story 14. When I was a teenager, my dad and this dude had beef with each other. My dad was dating this guy's ex-wife, and he didn't like that. They bumped into each other at a bar and exchanged some words. My dad left the bar, and the dude was waiting for him outside. A car rolled up, and somebody handed the dude a handgun. He pointed at his head from about 2 feet away and pulled the trigger. Luckily for my father, the gun jammed. My pops wasn't taking any chances, so he took off running. The dude cleared the gun and emptied the clip, missing all but one shot that hit my dad in the back. My dad was already downtown, and the hospital was only a couple blocks away, or so he thought. Unluckily for my padre, the hospital was under renovation and preparing for relocation. When he saw that it was under construction, he slumped over and called 911 for an ambulance. The surgeons removed his kidney because it was too damaged to repair and survived. The dude got an attempted murder charge and almost 15 years in prison. Story 15. When I was a senior in high school, they had a weird thing where you had to show up to the school to get your diploma. They also gave out the yearbooks too, so that was okay. I told my buddy we were all going cruising, and he really should tag along. Find a party or some girls. He told me he didn't have any money, and his mom was going to pick him up at the gas station that was 3 miles away. He wanted to run there instead of us giving him a ride. I tried to get him to come with us. Really tried. He wouldn't budge. Found out some kid was drinking after he got the diploma, I guess a lot. He was driving afterwards, swerved off the side of the road, and hit some kid that should not have been running to a gas station. He should have been being a kid in the back seat of a car on the last day. We were still technically in high school. He should have been with me. That was a heavy casket to carry. He raised homing pigeons, and at his grave they let them loose. It was beautiful. I sure miss you, David. Wish you came with me that night. Story 16. After most of the guests had left our home at the end of my son's 2nd birthday, we heard a loud crash outside. A guy driving down our street was upside down. His front-wheel drive vehicle made contact with the tire of a parked car, and the rubber on rubber flipped his car. I rushed out barefooted, saw empty beer cans thrown from his car, and cut my legs in the glass trying to check the guy out. Turns out he didn't have a seat belt on. During the flip, he was partially ejected through the sunroof, and when the car came down, his head was the main point of contact between the ground and the main support between the windshield and the sunroof. I could hear agonal breathing, got my sister-in-law to call the ambulance, and since a considerable amount of weight of the car was still pinning his head against the ground, I decided to go against the normal advice of not moving people, organized a bunch of bystanders to lift the car off his head, and slid him out while keeping his neck as still as possible. He continued to have agonal breathing, ambulance secured him and drove him off. Doubt he survived, but didn't have enough info to check. I don't know if I should have just left the car pressing on his head, but from the nonchalant way the ambulance and fire department responded, only a raised eyebrow when I explained my rationale. It either was the right call, was a forgivable mistake, or they could tell it wouldn't have mattered in the end. Because the glass cut me, and I got his blood, and based on the lumpiness of what came out of his ears, some brain matter. On me, I ended up having to take meds to decrease my chances of getting HIV since I didn't know his status, which made me feel like I had the flu for weeks. All that to say, wear your seatbelts, kids. You could die even going 20 miles per hour if you get unlucky enough. Also, if you don't have pants and shoes on, maybe just give instructions instead of touching bleeding people. Lessons learned. Story 17. Nephew was driving a borrowed truck when he and a buddy picked up a friend. Then the buddy shot the friend twice in the head and killed him. Then they dumped the body, returned the truck with blood and bullet holes, and went home. Next day went back to clean up the truck and were both arrested for murder. My nephew pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and testified against the shooter. Did a few years in prison, got out, and is no longer welcome anywhere. He's not able to leave South Dakota due to the felony conviction, and nobody in our family has any interest in helping him out, so he's stuck there where everyone knows him as a murderer. Story 18. Best friend was testing his bike about 200 m from his house after a service and fixing a few parts. Wasn't speeding at all, but had to swerve to avoid a mother and baby in the pram as they crossed onto the footpath/bridge he was on. Essentially, it's a blind corner leading onto the bridge, so cannot see who's coming until they actual step foot. He slid off the bike to avoid the pair of them and hit his head on a pole. Wasn't wearing a helmet or speeding, was simply testing the bike at probably 50 km/h. His skull fractured, basically brain ruptured, and I was stuck with him groaning in pain, eyes flickering uncontrollably with my shirt pushing into his brain, which felt somewhat like mashed potato. Waited for about 30 minutes before an ambulance arrived. Ambulance realized they couldn't help, so had to call in a helicopter. Was in a coma with severe head trauma for 2 weeks and died from pneumonia. Last words I ever said to him, when he was completely conscious, was "Wear your helmet." He said, "I'll be back in a minute or two." Story 19. Guy I knew had it all looking up, married his work colleague, had a kid together, bought a small house. But he just made the stupidest decisions when he got drunk. Has an argument with his wife, storms out and decides to drown his sorrows. Misses the last bus home, and instead of walking or getting a taxi, decides to try sleeping in a park known for homeless drug users. Ends up spilling his heart out and how he'll do anything to numb the pain. They offer him heroin, he takes it. 3 days later his family are panicking. They can see he's withdrawing money but can't find him. Eventually find him passed out in some alleyway. Mom books him into rehab out of her own pocket. Lose his job, his wife, his kid, his house. All because he didn't want to face his wife after an argument. He's cobbled together a life now, but you can't help but think what could have been for better or worse. Story 20. Was at a brewery with a buddy. We were regulars there and know the owners. A group of guys come in, and one of them gets absolutely shit-faced. Pretty sure he was doing coke as well. He was looking like he was about to fall down, so I invited him to take a seat at our booth. We talk for a bit. I ask him what sort of hobbies he has / things he likes to do. He says video games. I reply that I love video games too. I'm a game designer. He then stands up and says, "Fuck you." Confused, I just stared at him and said, "What?" He says, "This guy is making fun of me." Me and my buddy explain that I'm a game developer, and I was not at all making fun of him. I say, "I can't tell if you're being serious or just fucking with me." He then slaps me hard across the face. He says, "Can you tell now?" I'm flabbergasted, can't believe what just happened. I say, "You can't just slap people, that's not okay, dude." The bartender is a friend and saw the whole thing, lucky he's a bigger guy, which I am not, and immediately grabs the guy and kicks him out. Here's the kicker though. This was a work outing for him. Not only that, but I found out later my brother worked at the same place. I hear from him that he not only got fired but his fiancée left him too. I guess she was at the bar. Story 21. A guy I know that I was friends with in elementary school is currently in jail for murder. In hindsight, the psychology of it all kind of makes sense. His mom didn't want him and moved across the country to party and not be responsible for him. I don't even know the situation with his dad. He ended up living with his grandparents who held him accountable for absolutely nothing but tried to seem like hardasses. He ended up joining a gang near the end of high school, and as an initiation thing, he and a couple other new guys had to take a guy that was leaving the gang out into the boonies and kill him. The worst part is that they didn't even end up killing the guy. They just basically knocked out the guy real hard and then left. He ended up getting torn apart and eaten by animals, and someone in the area saw what the animals were eating and called it in. Story 22. My husband had just parked in front of the casino, and I heard a noise behind me that sounded like a dull thud. It was right by valet parking, and I thought maybe someone had a fender bender. Then I turned around and saw someone on the ground, and as I was maybe 100 feet away, I ran toward the person while calling 911, thinking he had been hit by a car. But within the next few seconds, it was obvious he had come from the parking garage above us. He hit head first and his neck was broken. Fewer than 60 seconds had elapsed, and the blood had already streamed longer than the length of his body. I was speaking to 911 at this point, and I asked them if I could check for a pulse, as I do know CPR and some other first aid. They told me if I was comfortable then to go ahead. I remember the security person from the casino, who seemed to me to take a really long time to get there, but that could be a side effect of the adrenaline in my system, telling me not to touch him, and telling him that 911 was a higher authority than him, lol. And so I did check for a pulse. I'll never forget touching my fingers to his neck, because before I could even be sure there was none, I was struck by how not warm he was. Not cold, but the difference between his skin and living skin was difficult to process and also to describe. The casino is less than 2 blocks from a fire station, and it was no time at all before over 20 emergency vehicles were on site. I stepped back to let the first responders do their jobs, and a police officer asked if I had seen him fall. I told him I hadn't, just happened to be the closest person to him, and had called 911. They didn't need me, so I proceeded to shake like a leaf for a while, and had several drinks to calm my nerves in the casino. I had weird dreams for a while, and something that really helped me come to terms with everything is an article I read a few months later. Turns out the same man had jumped off another parking deck of a casino in a city nearby around 6 months before, and miscalculated and landed in the river. Knowing that he struggled enough that he tried more than once. Perhaps this is strange, but I found a degree of comfort knowing that he did what he set out to do. It's been 8 years since that happened, and it will be with me forever. Story 23. There was a guy I knew called Pete. Pete liked to drink, and soon he got the nickname Party Pete. The trouble was, I think he decided that he had to live up to that nickname. He worked at a takeaway in town, but lived a long walk up a hill out of town. One morning, his boss wife came past the takeaway and saw that the door was open. She went to see what was going on, and found Party Pete passed out half in and half out of the open door. She woke him up and asked him what the hell he was doing, at which point he called her a fucking bitch. So that was Party Pete out of a job. He didn't worry though. He'd been selling drugs from the takeaway, and now he decided that would be his full-time job. Now he didn't have to worry about getting up for work, and he got more and more into the Party Pete persona. At Christmas, I was round at a friend's house for dinner. It was all very nice, a little bit drunk, a lot of good food. Suddenly, Party Pete showed up uninvited. He caused chaos, spilling red wine on one guest's nice, white dress. The host had a photo of her father in the kitchen. He had died several years earlier, and she liked to have him there watching over the festivities. He knocked that over and spilled a drink on it. He was firmly told that it was time for him to leave. Now comes the part where he messed things up for himself. He decided to drive home. On the way, he crashed into a woman's car that was parked in her driveway. She came out and said she was going to call the police. He offered her 2,000 euros. She said, "What use is that to me? You've destroyed my car." She called the police. They wanted to see some ID. He said his ID was at home. They drove him to his house. They told him to go in and get his passport. He went in. Several minutes passed, and the police decided that they had to go and see what the hell was going on. He had fallen asleep, and the police saw the fruit bowl full of drugs on his kitchen table. So, he ended up getting locked up. But the police gave him a way out. Tell them who all the other dealers in town were, especially who was supplying them. He gave them the names of every dealer in town, including his housemate, which made things very awkward for them when they were both released. He also gave the name of the main supplier who lived down the valley, a chap with the delightful name Killer. When he was released, people suddenly turned up in town going to the bars he used to go to, asking if anyone had seen him. He didn't dare leave the house because of Killer's friends. He couldn't stay at home because of his housemate. In the end, his parents had to come and get him, pack up his life, and take him home with them. He's never been heard of again. Story 24. When I was 26, 1976, a gentle, artistic friend from high school smoked weed and provided small amounts to close friends. Unbeknownst to him, his fiancée's younger sister, a teenager, had been arrested for possession of weed, was taken downtown to the police station and terrified by members of the narcotics squad. They told her they would send her to prison unless she gave them a cocaine dealer. She didn't know any real dealers and definitely not any coke dealers. She approached my friend and asked him to sell her some cocaine. He told her he didn't use coke and didn't know any coke dealers. She persisted and said she wanted to buy an 8-ball of coke, 1/8 of an ounce, or 3.5 grams. Finally he agreed, and he went and found her an 8-ball. She wanted to do the deal at a bank parking lot, which in 1976 was one of the few places where you could pretty much guarantee there would be hidden video cameras. It was of course a setup. He got into her car and handed her the drugs. As soon as she gave him the money, cops came from everywhere. He got 5 years in state prison and served 2.5. He was brutalized in prison by other inmates. He went in a gentle soul and came out a very bitter, hate-filled racist. He could not get a job because of the felony conviction. He figured, since I already have the name, I might as well have the game, and started dealing coke for real. He got busted again. This time he got 10 years in a federal pen, but served 5. He was never the same after that first bit in prison, and the brutal treatment he received in prison ruined his life. Story 25. One of my lifelong friends did. Perfectly healthy and normal 35-year-old guy. Driving on a highway in the late evening, on his way back from a wedding in a small town, so he's unfamiliar with the road and following GPS. He got a text from his mom, looked down to read it, and didn't see the sharp curve in the highway and flew into the ditch. When he came to a stop, he was able to call 911 and get an ambulance out there. It turned out that he broke his lower back in the crash, and he's paralyzed from about the belly button down. No control over bowels or bladder, can't feel or move anything down there. This was a few months ago. The worst of the exterior injuries have healed, but he's still in a care facility, and he's struggling. Story 26. Dude had set some arbitrary life goals for himself to hit. Stupid stuff like being married, having a career, owning a car. That kind of dumb shit. He wanted it all by 30. He currently has all those things, but at the cost of literally all of his lifelong friends. People who had known him since he was a toddler. He had a degree in chemical engineering, but couldn't find a job within his set time frame in the field, so he settled for a career at a school in a position his mom got for him. He had 2 fiancées leave him, and finally just asked a girl he didn't even really want to marry him because he was almost 30. Finally, he decides and plans his wedding. Oops, one big issue. He hasn't invited any of his friends because he has decided we can't help him anymore. He needs to further his career, so he asks his supervisor and boss to be his wedding party. He didn't even like them. Eventually we find out about this. Someone confronts him, and he says he's done with us, because we have nothing left to give him to further his goals. Ridiculous. We found out later on that he basically resented all of us because we were happy despite not being married or owning homes, and he was miserable. So now he has a wife he hates, a job he hates, no friends, and a used car he hates, and he lives in an apartment underneath his parents. Story 27. Story time. I worked for a certain dinner theater/show with horses in Chicago for a couple of years. During my tenure there, a dude came in and applied to be a squire. He was from Florida and had just moved after working at Disney in the parks in some capacity. He was not good at the physical part of the job. He was out of shape and slow, but he was persistent and showed up every day. Over the course of 6 months, he got better and settled in and started training for a promotion. One day he didn't show up, and our manager called the number he gave on file. His brother answered and said that he was living there, but he had some legal trouble and didn't elaborate. Our manager said that sucked, but we would hold the job for him as he grew on the team, and we all started to like him. Fast forward that evening, we are sitting around between shows in the locker room, eating dinner and watching the news. Breaking story: man arrested after massive CP ring exposed with our guy at the center. Dude had terabytes of CP that he had shot and produced from when he lived in Florida, and had a huge Bible of clients he was selling to. For the life of me, I can't remember his name, but I do remember the nickname our head knight gave him. Strawberry Jelly, because of his physical attributes when he first started, was akin to a jelly donut. Last we all heard, he was doing 25 life in Cook County. Wild. Story 28. Back in 2021, my best friend, M26, aspirated in his sleep after vomiting. His girlfriend called an ambulance, telling them she didn't know what was happening, but mentioned that he had asthma. He was rushed to the hospital, and his family and friends were called, but no one knew what was going on. He spent 5 days in the ICU before his family made the heartbreaking decision to take him off life support. There were no signs of him coming out of the coma. At first, I was in shock. I assumed he had overdosed because all the signs pointed in that direction. He was known to dabble in coke and pills occasionally. But his girlfriend swore up and down that he hadn't taken anything that night, and that it was completely random. Fast forward, and she finally admitted to me that he had taken a perk that night for back pain. It wasn't prescribed, it was bought from a dealer. He could have been saved. This man literally kept Narcan in his room and in his truck. He was the kind of person who would help anyone, always making sure he had some on hand in case someone around him overdosed. 3 months after his funeral, his girlfriend also overdosed. Her family kept her on life support for 7 months before they made the same decision to let her go.